The gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Seems to me that death is a constant companion in this life, right? I remember my first encounter with death as a child. I was probably 9 years old. I remember being called out of fourth grade. My grandmother had died. And that experience of death was one of detachment, right? I didn't understand. I was too young to emotionally process. And so there was a sort of physical, emotional response, but I didn't really know what was going on. What I remember most is at the viewing, seeing a body that the people at the funeral home had done their best to stitch just right, to put a little bit of makeup here or there to make it look like she had just drifted asleep. And that is somehow, though, a euphemism. That is what it felt like, that she had just kind of slipped from our grasp a little bit, that she had passed, right? All those euphemisms like that makeup that we use to hide the stark reality of death was working at that time, even though it rarely does. That was the experience of death that I remember well all the way up until I was in middle school. And then I found the different reality of death. I had a friend named Daniel. He was a peer of mine, although I think he was a year older. Daniel had no signs of being a troubled youth, but at some point, the struggle that he was fighting in this hidden and unknown way defeated him. He committed suicide while we were in 7th grade. That was a different kind of reality of death. He did not pass away or slip out of our grasp. He was pulled away from us. No matter what the funeral home had did, nothing could hide the disfigurement of a neck that had been used in that way. Nothing could hide the reality of a 13-year-old body in front of us. That was the reality of death, not the end of some biological process like my grandmother's. Real existential death, a force that had been working in his life to steal life from him way before his biological process ever ended. A force that seeks to destroy the creatures of God, to objectify, to make them an object instead of a person, to leave behind a broken body where once there was a friend. That's death. It's the kind of death that Jesus faces today, though not in the way that we would think. When Jesus hears the story that his friend Lazarus, whom he loved, was dead, he takes it with the sort of tranquility of one who knows that Lazarus, who was ill, has ended his biological life. His heart has stopped. It's not that big of a deal. It happens to everyone. That's the way Jesus starts this story. It's when he approaches Bethany and he encounters a crowd that is weeping and grieving. It's then that he takes a deeper step into what is happening as this gospel plays itself out. He steps into the ring with his true opponent, death that tries to destroy the creatures of God. It's an emotional scene. We catch just a little bit of it today. It says that Jesus weeps, and sure, he weeps, but not just because of grief. It says that he's greatly disturbed. That doesn't cover at all what the Greek is trying to tell us about Jesus' encounter today. As he approaches this site, the words in Greek describe something more like a complete agitation of his spirit. Right? There are two different words. One is a word that describes kind of this righteous indignation, this fury that Jesus has. He's angry, not at the people who are grieving, not at Martha or Mary for having some sense of doubt. He's angry at death. And there's a word that talks about his agitation as a sort of vibration. It's like the story of the sea that was calmed when Jesus calmed the sea. It's the way that the ocean looks on a day with a powerful storm that sends wind in every direction, and it looks like a washing machine out there, right? His body is vibrating with that energy. Wave after wave of tension is crashing on his soul and his body and his spirit. Not because he lost a friend, but because he realizes in this moment, that he is stepping into the ring with his great enemy. He who had been sent here to bring us life and bring it abundantly was stepping in to the only thing that tried to steal life from his children. Imagine the last time you had a fight or flight response, the last time you were truly scared, felt like you were going to get into a fight, felt like you had to do something to survive. Remember what it did to your body? The tension, the heart racing, that need to either flee quickly or jump in. Now imagine that with the weight on your shoulders of someone struggling for the life of the world, for the redemption of all of creation. That's what it means to be greatly disturbed in spirit. It's not just that Jesus is upset. Jesus is beginning a skirmish with death that will be completed the next week. He knows in this moment that if he steps in and he does what he knows he must do to show people his power over death by raising Lazarus, he knows that the very next week he will be arrested, tried on false charges, beaten, punished, tortured, crucified, and will be placed in his own tomb with a stone rolled against the grave. He knows what will happen next as he trades his life not only for Lazarus' life, but for all of our lives. He is greatly disturbed. This, though, is the skirmish, and the real victory, the real battle happens in that time when those who see life given back to Lazarus are so threatened by Jesus confronting the status quo, by Jesus' power, that they go on to try to crucify him. He tells Martha and Mary, today you will see something, but if you have the eyes to see, if you believe that I am resurrection and life, you will see the glory of God. The glory of God is not the moment when Lazarus is brought out of his tomb. Lazarus would come out of his tomb and he would go about living for a little while and then he would die again. The glory of God is Easter Sunday, when Martha and Mary, because they believe in resurrection and life, get to see that Jesus has won the victory. That death is no longer an opponent. Death is the vanquished enemy of God, now retreating from the territory that death once held. Now wreaking havoc only as the enemy seeks to burn that territory upon his final retreat, right? That's where death is now. No less causing pain and anguish, sure, but not one. Not one that can possibly win. I think what is important to me for this day is to see then what Martha and Mary are invited to experience. Because that's where we are. We're not Lazarus, and we certainly aren't Jesus. We are called to be witnesses of the life that God brings into this world. We are called to be witnesses to the life that Jesus redeems and brings back in those places where once there was nothing but death. And like Martha and Mary, we have Jesus walking alongside us to those tombs. And what does he say to them? If you believe, you can see, and if you see, you can hear my voice, and if you hear my voice, what I'm saying to you is unbind him and let him go. Unbind those things that were once bound by death. Let it go. Let him go. I think that you and I so frequently, we see death in this world. And actually, the reality is that you and I, like some of the other people in this story, we choose death in this world. We choose to feed and fan the flames of resentment and anger. We make small choices every day that result in death and struggle and pain for so many other people. We choose things that we don't even know lead to death. We choose to eat cheap food that we know is being grown by slave labor in farms in our own backyard. We choose the instant gratification of pornography, even though we know pornography is directly linked to sex trafficking and causes the enslavement of people. We choose cheap clothes, even though we know that that is being built and constructed by child labor on another part of the world that we don't have to look at. We choose to harbor resentment in our relationships with our partners, with our parents, with our children. We are incapable of making all the right choices that lead to life. We are as incapable as Martha and Mary ever were at raising their brother Lazarus. And so Jesus says to us, it's okay. Don't shake your hand in righteous indignation, thinking that it is left to you to roll away the stone and call Lazarus out. Believe and see that Jesus has stepped in front of us in every place that we go to see life. And every decision that we make, whether we make it correctly or not, Jesus has gone before us to work life into dead places, to call people out of tombs, to free people from what binds them. And what he asks us to do is not to carry with him the fear and trepidation or the anger and the frustration and the fury that he carried, but instead to be willing to step forward into a place that stinks and is full of rotten flesh and to take off that which binds those who were once dead. I don't know that I always have the courage to do so, and it's because I think I'm not always in touch with the power that Jesus has to do it. To have done the work of bringing life to death. But I pray for it. The pattern in the Gospel of John is to believe, and in so believing we might see, in seeing we might hear, in hearing we might believe more. And in doing all those things we might have the courage to approach death a different way. My friend Daniel was the victim of one of those small, seemingly insignificant ways in which we promote death in this world instead of life. It's something for which all of us, in different ways, must find ways to retreat from death and to invite the voice of God into our life to call out the dead. But more than that alone, you and I must find new ways to go into the places we do not want to go, to take on the courage that Christ brings us, to be ministers of unbinding. I pray for you and for me that this year, as we approach this next Holy Week, on next Sunday we will hear the story of Jesus' death again. Next Friday we will experience it together as a congregation. That like Martha and Mary, we will believe in the resurrection and the life. Because of our belief, we might see Jesus working in this world to bring life to places that are dark and dead. That we might have the courage to unbind those people who have previously been bound, to unbind those places and those things and those systems. And that like Martha and Mary on the first day of a new age and a new day, on the first day of the week, on Easter Sunday, that we might have courage to step into Christ's own tomb and see the light of the world shining in new ways. Amen.